Hey all you heroes out there, I'm your professional protagonist and welcome back to Hell Yeah Gaming's Let's Make a Fallout Game! This series in which I talk about how I would design my very own theoretical game set in the Fallout universe. In the last video, we discussed the setting and themes for our own Fallout game, Fallout Red State. And if you missed that, you can get caught up by clicking on the iCard in the corner now. Today we'll be covering basic gameplay and mechanics, but before I get into that, I need to call out our subscriber of the day, System of 11! If you want a shot at being our subscriber of the day, then just be subscribed to this channel and leave a comment on any video or community post. Now, on to the video! I've said it before and I'll say it 1,000 times more before this series is finished. While all long-running games have changed over time, few have evolved, or in this case, mutated, more than Fallout. Starting as a top-down isometric RPG, getting revitalized as a first-person shooter RPG, then shifting more into a looter-shooter with light RPG elements, the gameplay loop has greatly shifted focus over the last 2.5 decades. So where do we begin? As much as I love classic Fallout, I don't think even I would be receptive to returning to that style. While there's a lot you can do with it, and plenty of ways to improve the old interface, it's simply an outdated model that lacks a lot of broad appeal, as well as a lot of the identity and brand recognition that the IP has built since then. The FPS RPG nature of 3 and New Vegas is certainly my favorite iteration of the gameplay, but those games released 15 and 13 years ago, respectively. There's been more than a decade of advancement since then, and frankly, even when they were new, the gunplay and the shooter combat stumbled a lot. 4 neutered its RPG mechanics to the point that it almost feels like the game was ashamed of its roots, in favor of a more streamlined looter-shooter experience. To say that this decision was a divisive one is an understatement as big as the first nuclear bomb being named the Little Boy. But despite this, I don't think that streamlining the combat was a bad move at all. In fact, I think that Bethesda's bigger mistake was not going far enough in that direction. Now, put down your torches and pitchforks and listen for a moment. Just because I think they didn't pivot hard enough toward a streamlined looter-shooter combat style doesn't mean that I approve of gutting the RPG system. That was their second biggest mistake, and together it created an experience that was lackluster in both fields, in my personal experience. I think that we can both include a stronger, streamlined gunplay system, while also reinvigorating the RPG mechanics, and that these two things can create a stronger experience together. And I'm not alone in thinking this, either. I mean, ask anybody their biggest complaints about 4, and they'll say something along the lines of the gutted RPG mechanics and the lackluster story writing. By the same token, if you look at the most popular mods, once you set aside general performance and texture enhancers, you'll find the most downloaded ones tend to be those that make the combat more deadly. So there has to be some degree of overlap in these audiences, and I think I've got a general design plan that can fulfill both, while also making me personally happy. To that end, I'll be discussing these two halves of the gameplay loop in detail. Starting from the RPG mechanics, since that's where the series itself began, and because they'll tie into the shooter mechanics as well, so we've gotta lay down that foundation. Now to start, I think we should talk about what makes Fallout special. No, I'm not talking about the lore, the characters, or anything like that. I'm talking about the special system that's been integral to the very core identity of the franchise since it first saw the light of day. Or maybe that's the light of a detonated nuclear warhead. But either way, these 7 stats have been as inseparable from Fallout as the Vault Boy himself, leading some to question if they're an artifact that's really only still around because of that brand identity. Well, I'm here to tell you that special, that's your strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility, and luck are here to stay for Fallout Red State. That said, in the past, players were always given a bit too many points to allocate. The old guard fans criticized 4 for many, many things. But one thing that most people think it got right is that the lesser amount of special points you start with to allocate for your character actually made them more heavily consider their stat spread. So that's what we'll be going with here, starting with 28 points to spread out among the 7 special attributes. However, unlike Fallout 4, you will no longer be receiving a special point to apply at every single level up, nor will you have no level cap. While 4 had a good foundation for creating unique and varied character builds, the very fact that you could keep leveling up until every single stat and every single perk was maximized completely ruins the whole concept. Instead, we'll be pivoting back into a hard level cap, probably around 30 to 35, and receiving a point to either increase one of your special or purchase a perk once every 2 to 3 levels, whatever works best with game balance and play testing. Now, of course, at this point you may be wondering, if I'm not able to increase my abilities every level, then what is even the point of those other levels? Well, that's because skills are back, baby! That's right. Instead of every single check being governed by your special stats, with perks being absolutely necessary to even access different levels of skill checks, I'll be returning to having individual skill stats that govern your character's capabilities to interact with the world. Just as before, the skills will be measured on a scale of 1 to 100, having a starting amount based on your special, and can tag 3 skills at character creation for an instant 15-point boost. However, unlike in all prior Fallout games with skill points, the player will not be awarded a number of points based on their intelligence score. I certainly understand the rationale behind it. More intelligent people are able to learn more in a shorter period of time. I get that. But linking skill points to intelligence made it the most valuable stat in the game by a wide margin, and restricted the types of character builds that one could make. That's why Red State would have a blanket skill point system, a set number every character gains per level up. How many points would that be? Well, let's take a look at the 2 most relevant games to really see what it could look like. Fallout 3 awards the player 10 points plus their intelligence score in skill points every level, meaning an average of 15 points every level to allocate between the 13 different skills. With a level cap of 30, that's an average total of 450 points. New Vegas, on the other hand, is slightly more stingy, awarding 10 plus half your intelligence score in skill points every level for an average of 12.5 points, and also has 13 skills. However, New Vegas also has a significantly higher level cap of 50, meaning an average courier comes out with 625 points, nearly 200 more than the average lone wanderer. So what does this mean for our currently titleless hero of Red State, with an expected level cap around 30 to 35? Well, it's impossible to give a hard number to create balance for a theoretical game that will never exist, since that's exactly the sort of thing that would be tweaked through trial and error playtesting, but I feel like 15 is a solid number of points to give each level, considering the total skills available will be 13. Speaking of which, those skills would be barter, energy weapons, explosives, guns, lockpick, medicine, melee weapons, repair, science, sneak, speech, survival, and unarmed. But Pro, that's just the skill list from New Vegas. You're letting your bias show. Alright, I fully admit it. Look, I tried, okay? I really did. I tried to change up the skill list in some way so that it wouldn't just be a flat-out copy of the New Vegas skills. I thought of as many activities as possible one might do in a post-apocalyptic or sci-fi adventure, but everything that came to mind already fit under the purview of another established skill. I looked back at old skills in the series, but found that I totally agreed with how they were either integrated into others or dropped altogether. I know I said from the outset of this video series that I wanted to make a better Fallout game, but in this one instance, I'm afraid that you just can't improve on perfection. And speaking of New Vegas and perfection, let's talk about the dialogue system. Even among 4's most hardcore fans and defenders, I have never found a single person who thought the game's dialogue system was even somewhat acceptable. I don't need to harp on this. If you're watching this video, chances are you know what it's all about. Always having 4 options, no matter how complicated or simple the situation happens to be. Only having 1 to 2 word descriptions so you don't know what you're actually going to say. Most of the time it's just 3 flavors of yes and a no that ends up being ignored to be a yes anyway. Blah blah blah, you've seen the complaint or you've made it yourselves 1,000 times before. It may feel like a cop-out and it may take exponentially more work to write and program, but you just can't beat writing out full dialogue trees with every option on display for the player's choice, tailored to each individual conversation. And of course that means making stats other than just charisma or speech matter in dialogue again. Sometimes knowing how to communicate well isn't enough. To convince someone you know what you're talking about, sometimes you have to actually know what you're talking about. And that means more skill checks, dialogue options, missable opportunities, and actual consequences to what you say and how you say it. My mission statement remains true: to reintegrate RPG mechanics and storytelling while streamlining the combat even further. Speaking of which, my goal with the combat is to make it feel impactful and deadly, but easy to jump into. This directly correlates with a lot of aspects of the gameplay and mechanics, so let's just dive on it. Who hates bullet sponge enemies? I know I do. While I understand the theory behind randomly generated enemies that are matched to your level so that you always have a challenge, the reality of the situation is that they always end up just becoming a slog to deal with. And I feel that it robs the player of feeling like they've actually made any real progress, since no matter how powerful they get, the enemies will always be a match for them. This is especially egregious when there's no true level cap and your combat skills have been maxed out, leading to enemies to keep scaling up beyond your max damage output. A major issue with the likes of Skyrim and Fallout 4. However, 4 did take one major step toward improving on the problem of combat slog by ensuring there was plenty of different enemy types that had different behaviors, rather than enemies that all mechanically worked the same with different skins. having mole rats pop in and out of the ground and tunnel towards you, while feral ghouls flap their bodies about like zombies, is good stuff to break up the flow of combat. So part 1 of fixing this problem for Red State, ensuring a wide variety of enemy types that all have different behaviors and a variety of mechanical effects. I don't want every humanoid enemy to behave totally identical to a raider in form and function. And all the mutated creatures and monsters should be unique in what they can do, requiring you to learn and adapt in the midst of combat. Part 2 of solving this problem is to eliminate enemy scaling to player level. I don't want to see 4 or 5 different tiers of feral ghoul that can all spawn anywhere randomly. Enemies would have their own individual stats that would be pre-generated and placed where they make sense based on location, story, and quest line. Now, that isn't to say that there wouldn't be, say, generic raiders and generic mutants peppered around, but they would be designed with these same processes in mind. Some areas would be designed around a low-level character, some around a high-level character, and everything in between, mapped out with an idea of how powerful you should be when going to these places kept in mind. Now, you're thinking that this would completely destroy any tension or threat if a high-level character enters somewhere that was designed for a low-level one. Well, you're not entirely incorrect, but there are a number of mitigating factors that I haven't gotten into. For example, high-damage weapons already have an inbuilt restriction to them, and that's ammunition. For another, well, I think it's time to talk about how your special and skill stats would actually impact combat mechanics. The first one of these I want to talk about is hit points and their relationship to endurance. In every previous game, when you gain a level, you also gain a certain number of hit points based on your endurance score. The formula is different every time, but the core concept remains the same. Well, not in Red State. When you level up under these mechanics, the amount of hit points you gain is, well, I'm not sure how to break it to you gently, so I'll just let my good friend Gene handle it for me.
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
Classy as ever. Thanks, Gene. Yes, it's true. Level ups will not grant an increase to hit points. Instead, you'll be working with a single static pool of hit points that's based entirely on your endurance score and never changes. Well, never unless you increase your endurance or modify your hit points with perks or traits. And that means, equipment and armor notwithstanding, a Radroach will prove just as deadly whether you're level 1 or 31. Naturally, this puts a lot more emphasis on armor, but what if you don't want to be encumbered by all that heavy metal? What if you want to focus on an unarmored build? Well, I got you, fam. Action points have always been governed by your agility. In the classic games, they determined how many things you could do in a turn of combat, while in modern games they determine how many targets you can select in VATS, as well as how long you can sprint, which never made sense to me since that should be reflective of your stamina, aka your endurance, but whatever, that's a whole other topic. Now, in addition to these, the action points given by your agility would also behave as a hit point cushion. When you take a hit, the damage will first be subtracted from your action points, representing how your agility is letting you narrowly avoid taking a hit in the middle of a firefight. This would lead to some on-the-fly risk and reward decisions on if you want to stand your ground and hope that your action points can tank any hits that come your way, sprint to another location for safety, or use VATS and hope that the use of your action points doesn't leave you too open to enemy retaliation. That all said, this function of action points as a hit point cushion would be disabled any time that you're in power armor. After all, turning yourself into a tank does wonders for just shrugging off damage. But tanks aren't exactly known for their dodge reflexes, are they? Speaking of power armor, I should get into how this most classic of staples to the Fallout identity would function here. And look, I've just gotta say it, even though it pains me. Fallout 4's changes to power armor is the best thing that it brings to the series and completely revitalizes the mechanic in all the best ways. Wearing power armor has never felt better than it does in 4. It hurts to admit because the mechanics of it, while the absolute best the series has ever been, completely fly in the face of the established lore and facts and history of the series from day 1 until the day that 4 came out. Power armor had their own nuclear reactor batteries that enabled them to function for centuries upon centuries. Then 4 comes along and says, yeah, that's cool, but they don't feel impressive enough, so let's make you feel actually invincible wearing that thing. But in order to keep the game from being too easy, we'll have it drain battery cores like a Kardashian ass drains butt injections. It's a dichotomy that creates so much cognitive dissonance in my brain that... Ow! Ow! See, it's physically hurting me. Ow! Well, that aside, I intend to keep power armor working exactly as it is. A mobile tank suit you need to keep powered up instead of something you wear like any other ordinary armor or clothing. Maybe I'll be able to think of a way to actually make it make sense with the established lore and facts. Maybe there's some other collectible you'll have to find to keep it functioning that isn't the central battery, but mechanically, it's just the best way to go. Unlike in 4, however, I intend to bring back the necessity of being trained to operate power armor. Not just anyone can instantly jump in and wreak havoc with this kind of firepower, after all. And of course, you can't have firepower without weapons. And you can't use weapons without the right skill. So let's pivot to take a look at how combat skills will affect that. In all the modern Fallouts, each weapon has a base amount of damage it deals, which is then modified by your relevant combat skill. This doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense, and with the shift towards a higher stakes streamlined combat system, it doesn't make any sense from an internal game system point either. So instead, every weapon will deal a fixed value of damage, modified depending on where it hits the target, what kind of armor they're wearing, and any relevant perks you have. Instead of modifying your damage, the gun's energy weapons and explosive skills will have a direct result on your handling of the weapon. Things like weapon sway and accuracy and kickback and even reload times will be a direct result of your skill level and the weapon's own skill requirements. After all, a pistol is just as deadly whether it's in the hands of a toddler or an army veteran, but only one of those is going to know how to actually use it in a real firefight. Now, the astute of you no doubt realize that I left some skills out of that list, and to you I say, 5 gold star bottle caps. You aced your GOAT test and you will be a wonderful, productive member of our Vault Society. That's because the remaining combat skills, unarmed and melee, I think would work best in a way similar to how they've always functioned. While a gun will always work the same no matter who pulls the trigger, the same can't be said for a bat or a fist. Knowledge of how to swing your weapon absolutely has an impact on its, well, impact. And that's why melee and unarmed weapons will still scale their damage based on your skill level. Which brings me to the last point of discussion for this video. Critical hits. A crit is a pretty common mechanic in any game with RPG mechanics. A lucky hit that's more damaging than a normal strike. Traditionally, they've been random, with a chance of activation determined by your luck stat. In one of 4's many, many changes, they actually did away with random crits altogether in favor of making a system that gives the player far more control by building up a crit meter in VATS, which they can toggle at any point to guarantee the next shot to be a critical hit. In a mushroom cloud of changes that were proven to be largely disliked or otherwise polarizing, this one turned out to be actually pretty well received universally. People like being able to save a critical hit for a crucial moment in a fight, for a guaranteed hit when your raw stats only give you a 2 or 3% chance. That sort of control even allowed people to make early game builds towards specializing in critical hits in a way that just wasn't possible under a traditional random approach. It wasn't a mechanic that I ever personally took advantage of, but I would be insane to ignore how much the fan base likes it and how approachable it makes the gameplay. So it's definitely here to stay. My only concern is that with action points also acting as a hit point buffer, would that make it less feasible for a critical hit build player? Obviously, that question is impossible to answer without hard numbers and an actual program build for these mechanics, but it does make me wonder if I should combine the two systems? Leave the crit meter while also allowing for random crits to occur outside of VATS? You can tell me what you all think down in the comments. And that covers the basic gameplay for Fallout Red State. Of course, I couldn't cover every detail. This video is already plenty long enough as it is. But it gives you all the main points, and there are many more videos to come. If there's anything you want to be elaborated on, just ask in the comments down below. Same goes for any thoughts, suggestions, or general feelings you have. The next video will cover a few more mechanics as well as the beginning of the game, as I describe the process of character creation. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy me coming up with my own video game ideas, check out the playlist for my original fighting game, Quantum Combat. And I hope Fallout Red State makes you want to shout a great big hell yeah!